Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, we'll explore not just the 413, but all of New England when we hear about Exploring New England, your guide to all the interesting things to do for adventures traversing all of the New England states.
Except for Rhode Island, but we'll fix that. The Exploring New England Guide was produced by the New England News Collaborative, and we'll talk to the Western Mass contributor to the guide, NEPM's Jill Kaufman.
And since the guide caters to both beachgoers and voracious readers, we'll tell you about a new book by Ashfield author Rachel Lyon, Fruit of the Dead, which happens to be the current selection for the NEPM Book Club. We'll talk to Rachel Lyon later this hour.
But we begin with a brand new book just out today. The book is Sharing Space by Katie Coleman. Katie Coleman is a former NASA astronaut, retired U.S. Air Force colonel, scientist, pilot, musician, mom, UMass Amherst grad, and Shelburne Falls resident.
Quote, Katie Coleman reveals not just the extraordinary thrill of living and working in space, but shares practical and inspiring advice on how to overturn others' expectations to succeed by showing how she stayed positive despite the obstacles to earning her spot as an astronaut and sharing the tools she's learned about team building and how and when to speak up for change. Her story is a unique roadmap for leaders everywhere. End quote. Blurb on the front of the book, Sharing Space, by none other than Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. And Katie Coleman, the astronaut, joins us in the studio once again. Thanks so much.
Well, I'm always so happy to hear you guys on the radio, and I've been here twice before.
I think twice before. Yeah.
And it's just, I love being here with you guys.
Oh, thank you.
And
I say guys, I don't mean it like
it
that.
can be a gender-neutral term.
Yeah, we're of the generation where it's gender neutral. It's different for others, but
Okay.
And I've told the story every time you've been here, but the first time I met you, I introduced your husband. I said to a friend of mine, I said, this is Josh Simpson, the famous glassblower, and this is his wife, Katie Coleman, an astronaut. A real bleeping astronaut, which is the only appropriate way to ever introduce a real bleeping. You make glass blowers are a dime a dozen, rock stars are a dime a dozen. Jeff Tweedy from Wilco last week. Astronaut!
I think I said the same thing when you were at Green River Festival watching Twisted Pine do their final full set.
Oh, they were
on the
amazing.
first day, and you were blown away by their flute player. But after the set, you were trying to talk to them about their technique, and I was like, "And this is Katie Coleman, an actual astronaut."
Do you even know who you're talking to? Okay.
But this is actually kind of what. This is why there's a book. This is why there's a picture on the cover that is just so big and loud. You have to go, well, I guess she was in space and the Earth is round.
Yeah.
Right? And it's
yet,
because
people still will doubt this photograph.
One did actually.
I'm sure.
Really? Nope.
I kind of want to go there, but we don't have to go there yet.
No, but even though it's fun, sitting on a plane and somebody will say, what do you do? And if I have a lot of work to do, I'll just say I work at NASA, maybe, whatever. But when you tell people and they go, a real one? And I'm like, yes, a real one. But I'm not actually offended, but it is like this little paper cut. Or it's just even though it's a funny and a thing we can have a lot of fun with, there is something about kind of constantly showing up and having some people kind of look at you like, yeah, I wonder why she's here. And because it's sort of like we knew the crew would come, or I've even been at a dinner and the head of the company, very big company, said, "So what does NASA supply to our chemical company?" And I said, "I think dinner speakers." And he's like, "You are that guy." I'm like, "I am that guy." So it's all it's funny and stuff, but at the same time, I think you shouldn't have to sort of be so tough and just go, I'm just going to go to that meeting anyway. Because not everybody has that personality, but everybody has some gifts to bring to the table, and we miss them.
Right.
I think what's interesting about this book is it is as much about you going to space and the journey of you becoming an astronaut as it is taking life lessons that if you are not an astronaut, you can apply to your everyday life. I think particularly, when somebody says specifically, you can't do this, the attitude that you take in this book on several occasions is, watch me, and then go ahead and do it, including becoming an astronaut.
And I think what's behind that, too, is when the very first that little reaction that only you feel inside when they say, you can't do this, part of me is going, yeah, I'm a little worried about that, too. But the fact that they, are so sure, that kind of gets me. And then I'm sort of like, let's just show them and yourself, really. So,
Yeah. I think the other part of this that was a constant throughout, like the nuances of these lessons, was how often it takes a village and how that village shifts for each thing that you're going through. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, it's not always just the crew. Like, sometimes it's the people that you're connecting with on the ground and like other aspects of that too. It lends into both leadership and other decisions in your life. And I thought that was really, really cool. Can you talk about how collaboration really fed into a lot of this book?
all of us, I think, are part of teams that we like when you're on a spaceship or in a space station and there's 6 of you and you look around, everybody's floating and flying, but some of them you might wish were different. They, I'm sure, sometimes wished I was different and I did not talk as much, right?
Put that flute away, Katie Coleman.
I know.
Shouldn't you be asleep?
I did it in the cupola in the middle, so that I
okay,
used to
good.
play, so it didn't bother anybody. But at the same time, I would, the commander would float up and kind of give me this look, and I'm like, I'm getting there. Just need to unwind a little bit, Anyways, I just think that we're all different, but when we're up in that spaceship, there really is nobody else, and so there's this kind of visceral way to feel team. Where it is, and even if you wish somebody was different or somebody else was there instead of them, it doesn't matter because you're the ones that are there. And the mission is so clear. Like the experiments that we're doing that you can't do on the ground, when a new supply ship is coming up and the fact that you can't like bat it away by mistake. And I mean, you have to be really, really, really careful. And that you have to do hard things when you don't feel like it. We do this, and we actually have the easiest atmosphere in the whole world to do it in. Because it's so clear there's nobody else. Whereas here, when I know you guys are putting on a nice front for me about getting along and everything, but at the end of this, you get to go home, right? Well, supposedly, I know you work here too, right? You work after this too, and you work at night and all those things. But seriously, we get, if we have a regular job, we get to go home, have a little pretending that's not, and then come back with a new head, and we don't get to do that, and so I think it teaches us this is the crew. And if you think about, I don't know, I live in Shelburne, and we have town meetings. And sometimes we'll have a meeting about a topic, and we'll be there in the sort of old movie theater building, right? And this is all your friends and neighbors. And you realize that you have to figure out how you feel about wind power or solar or changing the rules that have been on the books for a long time. And so that's a crew as well. And we do get to lead the meeting, but I think remembering that really you are the crew is what is, I think, I don't know. It makes people realize that they are definitely part of a space crew in their life. They just didn't know it.
Yeah, but we can go home, and that is the big difference. Reading about the training and things that you have to do, even, it sounds like you're on one of those reality shows where they're putting you through your paces of all of these physical and stressful, on your body, underwater, G-force, centrifugal machines to try to prepare yourself. You could go home then, but all to prepare yourself for when you cannot go home. In the ultimate mission that you spent 6 months on the International Space Station.
Well, in all that training, it's when you learn something. Like, for example, emergency training. Just like kids have fire drills in school, right? And probably here, NPR too.
I don't think we've had one yet, have we? Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yes, we did.
Let's not say that. Let's not have it today.
We had an emergency thing happen earlier.
Yeah, there was a
today.
weird
There
blue
was a
light
weird
going
light.
off that we didn't know what that
Really?
meant.
Yeah.
Well, no, but actually, how did you feel? Wait a minute. We're like, oh, it's a light. And you're like,
No,
it
it
really could mean. Does anybody know what that means? And,
Yeah.
That
and
was
it teaches
exactly
you what
my
you
reaction.
don't know, and now everybody knows. And
It's like, oh, it's just the regular testing. That's good.
exactly.
Glad it was just that.
Well, and for us, I mean, when we practice, we do fire drills, and some of them will have actual smoke, and we'll actually have to don our gas mask, and then you find out that your, goggles get all fogged up, and you need your glasses. You need to have little lenses pasted on the inside of your, face mask or whatever. You find out those things, but I also find out things that we don't do well, and it may not be a fire. There's something in you really knows we're not going to catch fire. Nobody's going to die here today, that it's really just a drill. But the fact that you're being judged, really closely judged, adds that little bit that helps you make the mistakes that you are going to make on the real day.
Yeah.
Where you skip steps, you overlook what people say, you go too fast, you leave people behind. all those things, there's all those things we learn on the ground. And then when it really does happen up in space, you have this certainty that at least I've learned a few things before this happened.
I'll interrupt briefly to say that our engineer Betsy says the blue light either means active shooter or EAS test, emergency alert system. So we need to get different colors.
Well,
I think.
today it was EAS test.
Yeah.
They really should be different alarms.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a good thing. But
I
we
would
are.
agree. Actually, when I was at NASA, it's amazing to me how it all comes down to people.
Right.
And we have the crew who are doing robotics, so we're actually using the controls, do the robotic arm. We have people who teach us, who tend to be pretty empathetic, and we spend so much time together. They kind of know this is how Katie does that. This is how she doesn't do it well. We have a pretty good relationship. And then we have the flight controllers who control the robotic arm from the ground and are in charge of it and look at all the data. And I tell people that back in the day, I mean, this is different now, but it was really hard for them because it turns out this brand new robotic arm, I mean, it was so hard. And you just didn't, they thought they would understand how to control it. It would be like, we're going to do it this way, A, B, C. And it turns out, And so they behaved actually poorly sometimes, just like the crew, that it was because there were so few of them and their job was so much harder than had been originally thought. And so I had a meeting with the head of each of those things in my office for us to figure out how we could all be on the same crew and all be together and have empathy for each other and things like that. And it wasn't going so well. And then we had an active shooter alert on campus.
Wow.
Oh.
And we got to spend a bunch of hours together. And we figured some things out. Because there we were, like a little bit vulnerable, and everybody learned some way different things. I learned some of the things I just told you. I'm like, oh, I had no idea your job was so hard. You had so few people, things like that. So, anyways,
And it is a book of not only space travel and floating and your trials and tribulations of going to the bathroom, etc.
I don't
which
think
is one
I
of the
said
appendices.
any tribulations.
No, there is an appendice that specifically deals with peeing and pooping in space.
Well, I think when people ask those questions,
Isn't it always the first question? I remember one astronaut when I was a kid coming to my elementary school.
was it me?
And no,
Oh, thank you for saying that.
the only thing I remember is that it was a male astronaut and I was very young. And he said, the first question you are all going to ask is how I pee and poop in space. And so I'm going to just start right there. You end right there in the appendices, 1. But the appendices 2, as tempted as I am to talk exclusively about peeing and pooping in space, we're not going to do
I'm
that.
so glad we're not going to.
But I think we should take a break and talk about appendices 2, which is how you can view the International Space Station from Earth, which is where you spent 6 months. We are speaking with astronaut Katie Coleman from Shelburne Falls, whose new book, Sharing Space: An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change, is out today.
And later in the show, we'll hear about another book, the current NEPM Book Club selection, Fruit of the Dead, and we'll talk with the Ashfield-based author of said book, Rachel Lyon.
We'll also explore the NEPM Explore New England Travel Guide with NEPM's Jill Kaufman. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I love this song. I want to be an astronaut. We are with astronaut Katie Coleman, whose new book, Sharing Space, is out today. You were one of only 6 people not on Earth at the time of the International Space Station. You spent 24 years at NASA, 8,888 days.
Cool number or what? I'm really calculated. It's that's what it was.
With
That's
NASA,
fantastic.
180 of those days in space, 3 missions, 25 minutes and 34 seconds of launch time. And your first launch was canceled 8 seconds before you were about to go into outer space.
It's true.
Talk about hurry up and wait and dealing with frustration after literally years of preparation. 8 seconds before you're about to go into space.
And a number of cancellations, too.
I was
That
going to
wasn't
say
the first one.
they actually I was not people. When I got assigned to the second crew, they're like, "Oh, it's her. We're never gonna go." 7 times over 30 days. The first one, hurricane season. There was something that broke before we even got there to the launch pad. All that kind of stuff. We actually got suited up like 3 times, and then went. So, but it is hard, and at the same time, it's really hard on the families. And I mean, we know that eventually, when everything is fixed and the weather is good, we will go. And my mom would go, okay, you can tell me when are you going to go? I'm like, Mom, we don't know. She's like, I'm your mother. You can tell me. Mom, we really don't know. But the crew gets to go. But, your family has rental cars and all those things. But when it really happens, and my sister-in-law, we used to talk about where all the money should be spent and whether this was a good place to spend it in space. And even though it's actually spent on Earth, the money, right?
Right.
But it's not a stupid thing to ask, right? But
Yeah.
but when she saw the second launch, she was like, it's like the eighth wonder of the world, Katie.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's just all that power and real people, and they're going, and there's just something about how even though it's the best people can do, it's never exactly safe. And it's hard for me to watch launches because you just want so much for them to be successful. And it does only take 8.5 minutes to get to space. So that's why 3 launches, 8.5 minutes, 25 minutes of launching.
What is it? Low Earth orbit is what, 6 miles or something from?
You're thinking of the definition of space,
Yeah.
which is actually 50 miles,
Okay.
I think. Or there's different definitions, but that's one of them. But we're about 250 miles up, maybe up to 360 or so for like the Hubble, which is pretty high. But when you think about it, 250 miles isn't that far if you were going to drive it
Right.
from here to New York or whatever.
Not really, no.
Right.
Yep. And
4
so
hours.
it's just that we're working against gravity the whole entire time. It's hard to get there, and once you're there, then you can go around and around and around. And we go around the Earth 16 times every day.
That's
Whoa.
crazy.
Isn't that awesome?
That's a lot of
And
fun.
so the Earth is turning beneath you. So that's why every time it goes around, you're seeing a different part of the Earth. I'm seeing Boston, and then I'm seeing Chicago, and in the middle of the country, and California, and it depends where we are and how it looks, but it's amazing.
It's one of the cool parts of your book. Like, there's, not to give too much away, there's a series of sort of tragedies that happen with one of your crews, and for each one, there's a part of the world that you all kind of gather in the cupola to look at to make sure that you're together to observe and sort of connect with that space whenever it goes by, which I thought was really beautiful. But I wanted to ask you, because you have a lot of simulations. You have to have simulations on Earth to get ready to go into space, and not necessarily in a zero-G sort of way, but out of like being in the ocean, like being in deserts, being in Antarctica. Which one of those environments actually prepared you most for like the environment of space as opposed to the feeling of being in space?
The environment, meaning what it was like to live there?
Yeah.
I think the most important, well, I don't know. They're all amazing. They really are, and it's living in different worlds, and you can find different worlds down on the ground if you look. If you get off the bus at a different place or talk to the person next to you and get a little view of where they really are. And I think some of the most important lessons that I learned for really being my most productive self up there was that I might not like everybody I was with. And I was on a mission where I was focused on that, where I'd just be like, oh, and it was one that wasn't up in space, but it, just be like, oh, he did that again. Oh, I hate that when that happens. And my therapist person, I mean, there's nothing to me better than therapy except free therapy.
Right.
And that's what we get a lot of at NASA. Right? But we have a lot of experiences. I think it's good to talk them out. And she would call this cockroach thinking. Because part of your brain is doing that stuff. And I said, I could be up on the space station and I could be like thinking in this kind of negative way, focusing on stuff that actually doesn't matter and losing the experience of being in a space station for 6 months, one of the people furthest from Earth. And it really taught me a lesson. Like, I don't want to lose that experience if I ever get to have it. And I then apply that or try to all the time.
You traveled very far from Earth on the International Space Station, but today, on the launch of your book, pun intended launch, Sharing Space, Katie Coleman, astronaut from Shelburne Falls, you have been traveling around the highways and byways of the 413, visiting bookstores. Where did you visit on your book launch day?
Well, I've been actually doing this for almost a week, talking to everybody and seeing if they ordered the books, and I just I love our bookstores. I live in Shelburne, so I announced my book at Boswell's Books, and it's a really cute little video, I think, where and you don't see the part where if you're a cat person, which I am, when you hold a cat just a little bit too long.
Yeah.
And my son Jamie, photographer, person, did edit that video at just the key time before Boswell had just about had enough.
Yeah.
And
Boswell is the cat
I have
at the bookstore.
small scars.
Yes.
No. Anyway, so announced at Boswell's, Roundabout Books in Greenfield, World Eye Books. I started in Greenfield. That's where that's where I'm from. I'll be heading to Brattleboro. I'm going to hit all of them. Odyssey Books in South Hadley, in Northampton, Broadside. I was so thrilled they had my book they had it in memoirs, like biography memoirs.
Huh?
They had it in science, and they had it in self-help.
Nice.
And to me,
The trifecta.
I know. Well, I just loved it. I mean, because it's a book that, it's got a lot of different things, and I think I don't know, I like it.
And one of those things is how to view the International Space Station from Earth. I know it's a comprehensive appendices. I don't know if it's easy to say how to do it in a brief radio interview, but is there a pro tip on how to keep an eye out for the International Space Station from here?
First of all, of course, there's an app. Right? There's multiple apps, but look up Spot the Station. But the thing you need to know, no matter what app or where you look, is I don't think they prepare you. You're looking up and you're like, where is this thing? And you want to see something like zipping across the sky, like in the Jetsons. But it's going to tell you where to look and when. So know your directions. That's west. That's where I'm going to look if it tells you, right? And you're looking, and this looks like stars. And you're like, is that it? Is it moving? And then suddenly you realize one of those stars is moving. You keep looking, thinking it's not going to happen, and then suddenly it just is, and it's because the station has just come over the horizon and is lit up by the sun. So suddenly that star is moving, and that is the space station, and it is not zipping across the sky. It takes about probably 8 minutes to cross the entire sky, so it's really just sailing across the sky. And I love to think about the fact that now we have 9 people in the U.S. space station, and we've got 3 people in the Chinese space station. And so just knowing that there's people up there. So you can read the appendix, but you can also find it out for yourself. And we see it all the time here in Western Mass.
Do you have feelings about the soon, I guess it's soon-ish in the grander scheme of things, but to be grounding of the station?
I think it's important to take of course I do. I mean, because it's hard to give up something so productive, right? And because we're doing experiments up there. First, listen to the news really carefully, and every country, there's 16 countries involved, right, and several major countries, and it's going to be the right time in their political scene to say we're going to support the space station. And it might not be today, so they'll say, oh, the so-and-so country hasn't announced their support, and so it's going to actually end early. And when actually it just isn't quite time. And so I'm actually sure that we're going to have the space station for longer than what we hear about. And at the same time, it takes a lot of work and people and resources, and we have more things that we need to be focusing on and we need resources for, and that is actually going further, going back to the moon. We've got a crew that's going to be the first one to go the furthest we've ever gone out into space, out around the moon and back, and that's 4 people whose lives will be forever changed to look back and see both the moon and the Earth at the same time. And NASA has picked for that crew 4 people who are good storytellers.
Wow.
So we'll have to make sure they come talk to you guys.
Oh, well, yes, definitely. Maybe while they're out there in space, that would be so cool. There are allegedly some stranded astronauts right now. Before we let you go, Katie Coleman, do you have thoughts on those so-called stranded astronauts?
How come they get to be there? Seriously. I mean, I do want to set the record straight, though, because the words that the news people use are correct, but the emotion isn't behind it. I mean, we brought a new ship up there. It's in 2 parts. And as soon as it undocks, we're going to throw away one of the parts of it because we don't need it anymore. And that's the part that's having a problem. It's having some leaks in an unexpected way. And the more we can study, I say we like I just still work there, but the more it can be studied before they go home, the more sense it makes. And before this ever even launched, they did calculations. Okay, if Butch and Sunny stay for 3 months, is there enough food? What about 6 months? What about it? They're looking at all those things. What's the thing we're going to run out of? And can we bring more or whatever? So before they launched, they knew that they could stay a long time if needed. And in this case, the word need means it is really dumb to undock without getting all the data you can get. And I will tell you that knowing Butch and Sunny Williams, they are happier than anything. They are also, I mean, really, Sunny, just look up Space Station Tours Sunny, S-U-N-I, and you will realize that person will never want to leave the space station again. And she's so productive, and with 2 extra people, they are getting the to-do list knocked down to something reasonable. It is NASA at its best.
we only touched the very surface of this incredible book. There's all sorts of stuff about being a mom and being an astronaut. There's also that new documentary that features you and your family space, The
About
Longest
the
Goodbye.
developments that you helped create for both the space station and for folks on Earth through the space station. Like, it's really fascinating. It's a fun, easy,
Thank you.
like heartfelt read.
There's your spacesuit sexism that you face, your astronaut band, and so much more. The book is out today. It's a great read. Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change by Shelburne Falls' Katie Coleman. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always fun to talk with y'all, and thanks for talking about the book. I think it's got some good things. It's got some hard things in there too.
Yeah.
And
We didn't even get to
people
to
have
you,
goals, and
like,
they'll learn some things.
We didn't even
to
get
get
to
to
talk
those
about you reading the book for the audiobook.
Oh, yeah, which you recorded here at NEPM.
I did.
We missed so much.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk about it again.
Yeah.
My fault. I'm a chatter.
In case you need more reading material, we'll talk with Ashfield author Rachel Lyons, whose most recent book, Fruit of the Dead, is this month's NEPM Book Club selection.
But next, NEPM's Jill Kaufman tells us all some of the neat, out-of-the-way places you might read either of these books as she helps us delve into the New England News Collaborative's Summer Travel Guide.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering Co-op Advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop. NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village, offering research-based arts, music, fitness, and lifelong learning programs at their assisted living and Alzheimer's care community in Westfield. armbrookvillage.com.
I have seen old Israel's arid plain. It's magnificent, but so's Maine.
Summer day trips are a big part of life in New England.
And journalists from the New England News Collaborative have been on the road seeking out the best local spots in the region.
One of those journalists is NEPM's Jill Kaufman, who has visited some of the places in the 413 and maybe even beyond, visiting beaches and ice cream spots, bookstores and trails. And we're going to hear all about the New England News Collaborative's New England Day Trips Guide, which you can check out right now at nepm.org. I think for casual listeners, perhaps, of 88.5, Jill, they hear New England News Collaborative once in a while, maybe at the end of a newscast
right.
or what have you. But what is the New England News Collaborative first?
It came about several years ago. It's a regional collaborative of newsrooms, basically, and around the country there are these regional collaboratives. The New England News Collaborative is kind of obvious. All the states. And Rhode Island was in and then left and is now back in. But all the New England states, we believe that, you're in this region and there is, the borders could have been something else 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
Maine was Massachusetts.
Right.
All of it was Massachusetts.
It's still all Massachusetts, Khalees, isn't it? No.
Whoa. That's the only one that
It's a bit
matters.
heady, sorry. Yeah, listen, out here in Western Mass, you know what I started? I'll tell you more about the NEENC, but yes, you hear reporters signing off for the New England News Collaborative because legislation in Connecticut is interesting to people in Massachusetts because there may be parallel experiences going on. It could be similar climate issues. The waterways are the same. The Connecticut River connects so much of us to, at least part of the state, to other parts of other states, including, into New York with the Long Island Sound.
Does that mean we have to include New York in
Not
New
yet.
England
Not
at this
yet,
point?
but
not.
Oh,
not
thank
yet.
goodness. Thank
No.
goodness.
But it could change depending
No.
what happens with the election, So right on the website, right below all that breaking news, is the guide.
So you have contributed to this guide
Yes.
with reporters from all over New England.
Right, correct. So Massachusetts Guide is one guide. So it's broken up into Western Mass, Central Mass, Greater Boston, and Cape Cod. And I worked with reporters and digital folks at WBUR. They took on the crux of the state, but I took on Western Mass and made it a much bigger section than the whole other rest of the state. No, and I spoke with the newsroom. We sat and brainstormed ideas about unique things, not necessarily the things that you know to go to. I don't want to skip Tanglewood. I mean, people go to Tanglewood. So what you need to do when you go to our guide of Massachusetts is when you get to Western Mass, right away I say there's a debate about where Western Mass begins, and it's that wonderful Matt Shear about where Western Mass begins, and people in Boston saying it's
Worcester.
like west of where I'm standing.
West of Worcester.
From Worcester over.
Like a Worcester, I guess.
Worcester.
Matt Shearer is one of the most entertaining reporters out there for
delightful.
WBZ in
Delightful.
Boston, and I am like the biggest fanboy of the work that he does. He is absolutely hilarious.
Let's get him in here.
I would love that. He's got to cover Western Mass, though, which is the real Western Mass,
Yeah,
which
we
is
got to
here.
tell him. We got to tell him what's going on.
813.
So,
I mean, it's one of the first questions we asked when we launched this show. Like when we were in Boston, asking people, okay, so where do you think Western Mass starts?
Or what is Western Mass about? And they were basically like, dragons and Tanglewood.
right. But that said, so we did divide Western Mass up into counties, and people in Boston and people not necessarily in other states think about the Berkshires as Western Mass. One of the challenges I had was not thinking in counties, but thinking in delightful things to do, whether that's to find lakes or bookstores or theaters or music venues. And there's so much going on. As you know, every day it's what you're covering in arts and culture and in funky people and funky spots to visit. So, yeah, so we took a tour.
What were some of the highlights of the tour for you? Were there things that you hadn't seen or experienced before in these 4 counties that you got to experience by helping to write this guide and helping other people go and experience these
Great
things?
question. I definitely went and ate some ice cream.
Okay, which places?
But so among on the ice cream side, we talked about the creamies, right? Which I grew up in New York, and it was Carvel, and that was a soft serve. Okay, but creamies out here in the rural parts, creamies are they could be pop-up places, they could be next to farms, they could just be they're stands, and it's soft serve. And the one that we agreed to put out there is the New York style soft serve, which is in Hadley, almost South Hadley on 47, in between some farm fields, and it's higher fat content.
That's the key.
It's the key.
Yes. Yeah.
But no, there's tons of ice cream. We talked about Batch, which is in both Longmeadow and now in East Hampton, Mount Tom's in East Hampton. And one thing that was really delightful that I didn't know about was in Great Barrington, there's SoCo for South County, SoCo Creamery, but they have a set of Shakespeare ice cream flavors because Shakespeare and Company used to be, I believe, on the street behind the main street in Great Barrington, which is sort of like where I'm really dating myself now, in Great Barrington, where the roller skating rink used to be.
Wow.
And I don't know if anybody knows about that, but that was like the 1970s. So ice cream is one. There is a challenge. There's so many lovely, fun things to do, so much delight. And this is about delight. There's no hard news here at all. And that was really fun for us to also work on. But there are so many places, and we could miss something, right? So one of the things I worked hard to do was say, for instance, this fabulous restaurant, Blue Heron, in this incredibly old building that was, I didn't say that it was bought for $1, but I believe that is the folklore. It was bought for $1 and then renovated for $1 million.
And now occasionally has burlesque and drag shows.
Blue Heron does?
Blue Heron does.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's fantastic. It's upstairs in the event space.
How do you like that? So let's say I mentioned Blue Heron, which I did, but I also mentioned that there's a vibrant food scene because of all the farms here, and so I put CISA in there and said check out the restaurant. So, and I wasn't doing that to cover myself,
Tuchus.
my tuchus, but I did want to note that it's hard to make these decisions. It's so hard to make decisions about lovely things. So we tried to put people in touch with what else they could look at that would take them to other places. So, but food is one thing. Then there's, locations and hiking and gorgeous vistas. And my favorite thing, this is getting back to your question, was the eastern entrance of the Hoosick Tunnel in Florida.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by this tunnel.
Me too.
Fascinated by its history. I do want to take a tour one day. That's, I don't know, maybe we could do this together.
That would be amazing because they do have a few sanctioned tours a year, and that's
They
it.
do.
And we have to go during the day. That thing is mad haunted.
Yeah,
It is
we
mad
had them
haunted.
on about the haunting of that, about around Halloween.
So many people die.
So
Yeah.
one of the things that we had access to through the New England News Collaborative is a fabulous journalist photographer, Raquel Zaldivar, who the stations were able to send in different directions. So I sent her to the town of Florida, which is the tippy top of that point of Route 2 where you can see an incredible view. And she went down toward the tunnel, toward the eastern entrance, and took a great shot. And, there's links to information about that tunnel and what it was historically. But I hope that people go farther. I hope that they find something interesting that might be historic or about food or about, in Shelburne Falls, the glacial potholes. Like, find out more, dig deeper. I hope people are as curious as we are.
If you're curious about things apart from just Western Massachusetts, the guide goes through all of Massachusetts. It goes through Central Mass. It goes through the Boston area. It goes through the Cape and the Islands. It also covers Vermont.
Yes.
Maine and Connecticut and New Hampshire is forthcoming.
New Hampshire's forthcoming, and these are all different web pages. So each station did their own guide. We worked, as I said earlier, with WBUR because we did a statewide guide.
Conspicuously missing is Rhode Island.
Okay, so Rhode Island just re-entered the New England News Collaborative. Small state, small staff. They just couldn't this year pull together a guide. But I lived in Rhode Island, so if you have any questions,
Let's go. Let's spitball about things to do in Rhode Island.
Okay,
Fire water.
Water fires.
Water fire,
in
fire
Providence,
water,
Rhode
fire
Island.
water. It's water fire.
Yes.
Water fire.
Okay, blast. It has been a blast since Buddy Cianci uncovered that river. Giving him full credit, there were many people involved. It's art, it's music, it's food, it's awesome. I still send people to Atwells Avenue. This is downtown
So I got my
Providence.
first illegal tattoo.
Get out!
Yep.
How is it doing? Is it festering
It's faded,
still, or
and
is
it's
it?
where you can't see it, so my parents wouldn't find it. They found it that day.
I just got my first tattoo. Also,
Oh, nice.
it's matching with my daughter. It's a rub-on.
Oh.
Okay, I'm getting a tattoo sometime, but you heard it here first. Okay, so Rhode Island, the Comptons, beaches,
Yes.
Little Comptons. Little Compton is known as the Comptons. Also, there's also a knitting store there. If you knit,
I do knit.
You do knit. I believe there's a beautiful wool store in Little Compton. It could be an adjacent town. Rhode Island.
And we should
guide.
make our own Rhode Island guide.
Let's do that.
Newport is an incredible, fun city.
I think like Rhode Island's really, really nice, and like if you can take the whole day and go kind of to almost the whole state.
Yeah. The beaches of Rhode Island are incredible.
Yep, and usually not like
Narragansett, not just the beer, but the town is fun.
Yes, it is.
Great
It is.
beach.
It is Charlestown, and in
Charlestown.
August there's the Rhythm and Roots Festival, which one of us is going to. At least one of us, Zydeco Cajun and Emily Lou Harris.
Yeah, nice.
I just never expect it. I'm going for like the Steve Riley and the Mammoo Playboys and
Right.
all those folks.
And frankly, like Providence has a bustling, thriving indie rock scene, and always has.
My band used to play there back in the day.
Providence also has a neighborhood quartet, which is the neighborhood we lived in, which was the Armory. And it's a classical music quartet that gets into the schools and gets families to concerts. And it's really cool. And it's run by wonderful people who love cities and love children. And that's another cool thing. Clearly, we're all moving back
We
to
love
Providence.
Providence.
There is a historical site for H.P. Lovecraft if you're interested in local horror.
Ooh, in Providence?
In Providence.
Nice. Rhode Island does not appear in this NEPM guide to touring around New England, exploring New England. But that's our quick spitball about what to do in Rhode Island.
Correct. And the other spitball here is that these guides can be updated. So Rhode Island might come in later in the year. I don't know. But we can add to these guides. For instance, I forgot to put something in that is something that people know about if they're interested in antiques, but I forgot it. And I don't want to just put in Brimfield, but I want to tell you about what's not Brimfield that's very close by, that's year-round, these really fabulous buildings filled with antique bric-a-brac dealers who want your stuff because they want to sell it at Brimfield. It's really a fun area. Of course, there's a Treehouse Brewery nearby, where there's a treehouse everywhere. Brimfield is on the edge of Hampden County and Worcester County. And when I looked it up, I'm like, oh, gosh. But I asked for some guidance from colleagues in the New England News Collaborative. I said, I'm having a really hard time organizing how we tell people about these wonderful day trips. We had characters or caricatures, nature lover, book lover, things like that. And I said to my colleague at WBUR, I'm just thinking about the counties. And she said, stop thinking in counties, because I think in counties when I think about coverage. I don't know if you do.
We definitely
We have
do.
Yeah.
it is the
Yeah.
whole nature of our show.
I never thought about counties in my life growing up or in Boston. I lived
Right.
in Suffolk
And
County.
neither did I
knew
when I
about
lived
Middlesex
there.
and I
Yeah.
knew about, Essex. And I never thought about where I lived county-wise, but out here I can't stop. So we didn't think about counties. We thought about the types of people and what they would like to do maybe on a day trip. Who are you and what are you seeking?
What's a thing? I'm gonna make you show your cards, but like, what's a thing that you left out because you don't want too many people to go there and for it to be spoiled?
Every swimming hole I know about.
We so appreciate that.
And so does the rest of Western Mass.
Is hot dogs in Worcester actually a thing? That is a new thing to
Coney
me.
Island hot dogs.
According to my
Really?
friend Lisa at
Yeah, they're a big
WBUR,
deal.
yes, it is. Well, I actually wanted to put in a whole gaming section. I wanted to go from something
I
as
saw that.
delightful as quarters to various places in Greenfield that different types of gaming. BUR said we got a really big section in the Worcester County or Central Massachusetts.
There's an e-gaming center. There's a puzzle place. There's a couple of escape rooms that they talk about. But also, we have those all here. Why you gotta hoard it all for?
But it's
Worcester?
fun. If you know you're going to Salem, to go to the Willows, where they have this
Yes.
incredible arcade where, every time we go to the
They
North
didn't
Shore.
mention that one.
They did mention that
Did
one.
they?
Yep.
Okay, I missed it.
That's in there.
Were you looking for your favorite places of what you knew?
I was hoping, like Khalees asked, that my favorite things would not be revealed.
And were they?
Because I only want certain things revealed. I want people to know how cool it is here, but not exactly
Raindrops
how
on
cool.
roses and whiskey. What
Yes.
are your favorite things, Monty? Name one that was mentioned in the guide, Massachusetts-wide, that you were bummed to see.
Well, I was bummed to see Arnold's the Cape Cod lobster clam shack, because that place is garbage. I'll put it right out there. That's my own take.
Comment.
And I was like, fine, go there. There's 1,000 better places I can tell you to go in the Cape, and I'll keep the line short.
But you're not going to tell people because you want to keep the line
Yes,
short.
I want to keep it secret. That's why I didn't work on this.
Did you have a place that was mentioned or not
the
mentioned?
places that got mentioned that I was really happy to see because I want to see more people there were Abandoned Building and White Lion and Dreamaway and Beckett. You have it in the restaurant section, in the foodie section, but people who don't go often don't realize it's also a venue.
Yeah.
It is such a magical, wonderful stop, and I hope more people do go there and stay there. So I think I was more happy to see some of the places that you did mention than places that you left out.
Good.
One thing that you did include that I love and that I think is a gem that everybody should visit, even if it gets too crowded, is the Montague Book Mill.
Yes.
One of my favorite places on earth. And that shows up in this guide, which you can check out right now. It is called New England Day Trips. It's at nepm.org. It's a product of the New England News Collaborative, including our newsroom here at NEPM and our very own Jill Kaufman, who did all this wonderful reportage, eating ice cream and going to the coolest places around. It's kind of like what we do every day.
It's kind of like wanting to be with you every day.
You did mention my favorite kielbasa place in Chicopee, but I don't want to start any fights, so I'm not going to say which one
Don't
it
say
is.
it. Don't say it. All right. Thank you so much for asking about our work.
Thank you, Jill Kaufman.
Bye.
Time for a new take on an old story as we step into the pages of Fruit of the Dead, a contemporary tale that harkens heavily to the Persephone myth with author Rachel Lyon.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, offering solar options, energy security, and solutions for the local community. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Fruit of the Dead is a new novel by Ashfield author Rachel Lyon. It's a contemporary reimagining of the myth of Persephone and Demeter set over the course of one summer on a private island. The novel wrestles with addiction and sex, family and independence, and who holds the power in a modern version of the underworld.
Fruit of the Dead is an NEPM book club selection, and you can join the NEPM Book Club, a quarterly virtual meetup dedicated to bringing NEPM friends together to chat about new works of fiction on Thursday, July 18th at 7 p.m.
Author Rachel Lyon will be part of this event for a Q&A during that meeting, and Rachel Lyon joins us now. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So first off, I feel like, what was compelling about the Persephone myth that you wanted to retell it or reimagine it?
Yeah, so I actually started this book before I started the book and then decided to incorporate the myth. So I was already working on this novel about a young woman becoming involved with her employer and the sort of questionable things that may or may not happen, starting during the Me Too movement in 2017 and 2018. And it was only a couple of years into working on the book that I started to notice these parallels with this ancient story. And it occurred to me that, hey, the form of my novel is already following the form of this ancient myth with the sort of descent and rise, sort of mythological plot. So I decided to try incorporating it. And as I started working on it and incorporating it more closely, it started becoming really fun. So I just went for it.
Cool.
And then you completely lean into it as I read you a few of the chapter titles. Chapter 1, A Snare for the Bloom-like Girl. Chapter 2, The Wide Path Earth Yawned There in the Plain. Then you get to Chapter 9, And Yet She Beheld Earth and Starry Heaven and the Strong Flowering Sea Where Fishes Shoal and Still Hoped to See Her Mother. That's the chapter title.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you used for these chapter titles, which you can read all together in one beautiful long way.
Yeah. The chapter titles are taken from the Homeric hymn to Demeter. I found a translation of that ancient text that was published in 1917, I think. And I loved the poetic language. It's so lush and fruitful, if you will. And I found it really irresistible. So I wanted to incorporate it and sort of pay homage to it through those chapter titles.
But there's no Homer as a character in the book, although there is a Virgil.
There is
Yes.
a Virgil.
And your main younger character is named Corey, which I was assuming was a take on Persephone's original name, Kore.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you may not be too familiar with this particular myth, but let's not spend too much time talking about the ancient myth. Let's talk about how your book, Fruit of the Dead, fits in to the retelling of this myth. Your main character, the Hades character, if you will, is a pharmaceutical head, which I think is an interesting take in the world of Sackler and the opioid addiction crisis that we're experiencing across the country. When did that come, before or after you decided to go and retell the myth in this way?
That came after. So I actually started this book when I began working on the novel. She was my main character, Corey, who's 18 and inexperienced. She was working as a writer's assistant. So Rollo started as a writer, and that was a little too close to home.
Right.
To be honest. Once I started working with the myth, I started thinking a lot about, what it meant for the Greeks to have these gods and goddesses that are so different from the god that many of us think about today, right? They're more like celebrities, honestly. It was more like looking at the Kardashians on television than it was not that if the Kardashians had omnipotence over our lives. So I was really interested in the way that I could use that to talk about power and late capitalism. And I landed on this, pharmaceutical head, mostly because I was thinking a lot about, those 6 pomegranate seeds that Persephone eats when she's in the underworld that bind her to this place. And the relationship between addiction that felt to me like a way in, right? So that's what brought me to the big pharma stuff.
But it ends up being an interesting foil for what her mother does. At the beginning of the novel, her mother works for this NGO that's developing new rice, and to certain ends. And it was an interesting parallel to see this ostensibly sort of crunchy, naturalist perspective through science, and then this very much directly scientific interacting with the human body aspect of it as two polar opposites for Corey to try and balance herself between. And I'm curious about that. Her mother's job as a counterweight to what your Hades in quotation marks does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking a lot about power and how power looks in a late capitalist world,
Right.
and even a sort of do-gooder caught up in the bureaucratic world of trying to save the world through magic rice, which is very much we'd love to be able to do that. We'd love to create a product that would save the world, create world, get rid of world hunger for good. And that's kind of where Corey's mother is coming from. But the novel doesn't, allow her to really succeed at that.
We don't want to ruin the novel. The novel is Fruit of the Dead by Ashfield author Rachel Lyon. It's the NEPM Book Club selection, and there'll be an event on July 18th where you can get together with other NEPM listeners to talk about this book.
Oh, I feel like my questions are all going to give away a lot about this book, but there's also, I don't think Corey ends up spending a lot of, outside of the beginning of the book, Corey doesn't really end up spending a lot of time with people her age, is another thing that I thought was interesting about this book. She's always with people way older or old enough to not really connect, or people way younger than her who definitely don't understand anything about how any of the world or themselves really work. And so that way of keeping her untethered also, I thought was an interesting perspective. How was connection for Corey herself a thing that how did you want to work with that in this book?
Yeah. I love that observation because I was very much coming from this place of at 18, we're suspended between childhood and adulthood. There's a couple different moments, in fact, in the book where she is just in a doorway, right? She's taking care of these young children, she's nannying, and then she's also employed by this older man who's, who has a lot of power. There's her mother, she does have peers, but she's removed from them by this, this job that she's taken. I started the book before I became a parent, and I finished the book after I had become a parent. And so I was thinking a lot about this. You know, that strange time of life when, like, your future is sort of dangling in front of you and you can't see it and you don't know what's going to happen. And your agency itself is really uncertain. And I was thinking about how that lack of agency plays into the myth and these Me Too stories of women caught up in the dynamics of power and so on.
We only have a few seconds left. I'm curious, why did you choose to use no quotation marks in the book?
I started leaving quotation marks out in my first book, which is called Self-Portrait with Boy. It's told in the first person retrospective, so past tense, and there was something that seems sort of false to me about using quotation marks in recollected dialogue. Like, how do you know that you really are remembering it right, you know? So I took them out, and it felt more believable to me, and then that just kind of became the way that I wrote.
I thought it was a fascinating literary decision to make.
Thanks.
And we're speaking with Ashfield's Rachel Lyon. The book is Fruit of the Dead. It's the NEPM Book Club selection. And Thursday, July 18th at 7 p.m., friends of NEPM who are part of the book club can get together virtually with Rachel and ask questions like we have just done right now. It's the book I've read the fastest in recent memory. So all of the places we recommended you go to, like beaches from the Jill Kaufman segment, you could take this book and be done with it.
Before you burn.
Yeah, before you even get a sunburn on the beach. Thank you so much.
Love it. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Wednesday on the Fabulous 413, we're talking to an organization that helps to make a ton of the arts in the state happen and who just happened to be making a move to Holyoke. We'll talk with Brian Boyles, Executive Director of Mass Humanities, about funding creativity in the Bay State and resettling into the paper city.
And another book for you from reporter Mike Dobbs, What They Didn't Teach You in Journalism School. We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.